gonna fly.
G'day, welcome back to the channel. Now this video was going to be a rant. I even filmed it, edited it, and then I stopped and thought, no, don't want to do a rant. Rants are for when you are angry, rants are for when you are outraged, rants are for when you think you can change something by strongly expressing your thoughts and opinions, and I'm afraid this isn't one of those occasions. I think this is more of a lamenting of things that have happened, a considered disappointment in the state of affairs in the hobby. And what am I talking about? Well, today the AMA posted a video proudly announcing that they had been awarded CBO status by the FAA. And that's something we've been waiting for some time. Everyone knew the AMA would get CBO status. There's a couple of other organisations that have been pitching for that. That's the FPV Freedom Coalition and Flight Test. They both would like to become CBOs because CBO status comes with a number of privileges. One of those includes the ability to organise freers. You know, these are the areas you can fly a model without the overhead and the burden of remote ID. So freers are a really handy thing to have under your belt. Now, the AMA, to their credit, to their very, very strong credit, at least in the video that they put up today, they admitted something that we've known for many years, but they've never actually come out and admitted it. They've admitted that they advocate for their members. Okay, well, we know they advocate for their members, but it's very important. That doesn't mean they advocate for the hobby. The hobby is this big, AMA membership this big. It's different to years ago. Way back, if you go back several decades, most people that seriously flew model aircraft as a hobby were members of the AMA or an AMA affiliated club. That's just the way things were. But these days, well, the world's changed a lot. We have the ability to go online and buy, you know, a ready to fly or a plug and fly model, you know, from Banggood or some other place, have it delivered and just go down to the park and fly on your own. You don't need to become a member of a club these days. And that really opened, when that started happening, the hobby exploded. If you go back, I don't know, maybe 15 years, 12 years, 15 years, there was a massive growth in this hobby because suddenly you could go online and buy models and fly them in your local park. It was amazing, it was fantastic, and it revitalized this hobby. It really did, gave it a kick in the pants because the hobby, until then, was graying out. So you might be wondering, why am I doing this sort of downbeat video just because the AMA got awarded CBO status? Well, because this is the next step down the path to the oblivion of the hobby. Yeah, I'm not joking. I'm not overstating this. I believe the hobby is scheduled for oblivion. It's scheduled for dismantling, destruction by none other than the FAA. The FAA have made it very clear that there is no room for this hobby in the new world of commercial drone operations. In the past, we've had this 0 to 400 foot space pretty much to ourselves. But now we've got some pretty damn big companies with very big wallets lobbying politicians to clear us out of the airspace. We've got Google, we've got Amazon, we've got Boeing, we've got Airbus, we've got every major aerospace corporation in the world saying, we want this space for our delivery drones and our advanced air mobility, flying taxis, all these sort of, this is where we want this airspace. These models are an inconvenience, they're a hassle, they're a nuisance. Now, when the FAA first started rolling out all these revisions, it started with the revoking of Section 336. They wiped that. That was the protection in the USA that this hobby had from ridiculous over-regulation. It was wiped, completely obliterated. That was the beginning of the rot. And I said at that stage, this is the thin end of a very nasty wedge that will ultimately see the rights and freedoms of hobbyists completely eroded. A lot of people said, oh, don't worry about it. And the AMA said, don't worry. You can trust us, don't worry. We're working with the FAA to preserve and ensure the rights of hobbyists. They didn't mention it was only AMA members they were working to preserve the rights of and anyone else gets put under a bus. They didn't say that, but they did, at least they did today. But they said, we can do deals with the FAA. We get on really well with the FAA. We'll work with them to protect the hobby. Unfortunately, they're pretty naive over at the AMA, in my honest opinion, because I've been around on this planet for a very long time. You can tell by the look, right? I'm not a youthful 20-year-old anymore. And I've spent a lot of time dealing with bureaucrats, government departments, government agencies, and politicians. And if there's one thing I've learned is you cannot trust these people. They will tell you what you want to hear, and they'll do what they want to do as soon as you leave the room. That's the way it works. Unfortunate, it's just true. Absolutely true in my experience and in the experience of many other people this is what happens, right? So when the AMA said, we're working with the FAA, to preserve the rights of hobbyists, I didn't believe it for 1 second. They might have thought that's what they were doing, but that's not what was happening. So we had the revocation of Section 336, which basically opened up the hobby to rampant over-regulation. Then the first thing we had was, we must have registration. Oh, don't worry, they said. The FAA said, don't worry, registration is just to hold people accountable, and it will solve all the problems we have with people flying drones at airports and things. This will make people responsible for their actions, and we'll all be safe again. It's all about safety. This is safety. This is why we're doing these things, to preserve safety. And of course, that was another lie from the FAA. That didn't really was an honest representation of their agenda, because I said to people, don't register. Do not register. This is just the wedge getting a bit wider. And if you fall into line, then things will get a lot worse. And so people went out and registered. They don't listen to me. I'm just a cranky old man from the other side of the planet. What do I know? So most people went out and registered. Everything's fine. And the AMA encouraged people to register your models. It's all good. Don't worry. And then we found, registration isn't enough. The FAA had lied to us. Oh, no, we need more than registration. You'll have to sit a trust exam now. Sit a trust exam. You can't fail it, but it's, education. So it's all about safety. We'll educate you. It's all about safety. So people went out and sat their trust exam. And then we were told, no, we need remote ID. I know we said that registration would solve the problem. I know we said the trust exam would solve the problem, but remote ID will solve the problem. You see this wedge getting bigger and bigger and bigger? Every time you move along, they just push it in a bit deeper. Pretty soon, you're skewered, and that's exactly what has happened. So now, remote ID. And this is where the real agenda of the FAA is exposed for all to see. Well, all except those who choose not to see. Now, when the FAA first proposed its remote ID rule, the NPRM for the remote ID rule, there were some very, very telling components to that proposed regulation. Number one, we were going to have network remote ID, so that nobody could even arm their drone or their model aircraft without getting an approval from a central control system. So you would go there, you would basically request approval to take off, and then you couldn't take off, you couldn't even get your motor going until that approval electronically came back and your device armed. So they had full control over when and where you could fly. That was one of the key tenets of network remote ID. The other thing that was really telling about the FAA's attitude to the future of this hobby was that they were going to have a system of freers. And a freer, there'd only be a limited period when freers were allocated, and after that, no more freers. That was it, no more freers. There was only a finite number, and as they aged out because of changes of land use, they would all be gone. Within a few years, there would be nowhere you could fly your model without the encumbrance of all this remote ID stuff. So it was very clear at that stage that the FAA's agenda was to just get us out of this airspace. This airspace that has become so very valuable to the likes of Amazon and Google and Boeing and Airbus and all the others that want to produce all this new activity in the 0 to 400 foot airspace. And remember, these companies, a lot of money, and they go to their politicians and say, you must do this for us because we give you lots of campaign donations. And you might think that it's the FAA that makes the regulations, and in New Zealand it's the CAA that makes the regulations, and in Australia it's CASA, in Canada it's Transport Canada. But let me just quote from a tweet that New Zealand's CAA sent me. CAA said to me, CAA are regulators for the civil aviation rules created by government. If you'd like to change the rules, you could consider approaching your local MP. Now, there we go. They have said, we don't make the rules. FAA, we don't make the rules. The politicians make the rules. We just follow their bidding. And that's exactly what happens. So the FAA are simply doing the bidding of their political overlords, their political masters, the politicians who have been, and I'll be quite blunt about this, I'm going to be totally honest, they've been bribed by lobbyists and campaign donations by huge corporations with more money than God. Google and Amazon, these companies, so much money, they can afford to buy any politician they like. This is what they do. They go out and buy a politician, and that politician then tells the FAA, or those politicians then tell the FAA, get rid of the model aircraft. But do it, nicely. Don't let them know you're doing it. The NPRM for remote ID was the first and most obvious a betrayal of the true agendas here. And this is continuing. Now, the AMA, in their naivety, thought that they were working with the FAA to preserve the hobby, but no, they weren't. Because, as I say, the politicians and the bureaucrats will tell you what you want to hear and then do what they want to do afterwards. They don't give a damn. So the FAA said to the AMA, you look after us, you support our regulations, we'll give you special privilege. We'll make you a CBO, which will give you special privilege to have freers, and your little area of the hobby will be protected. So, you scratch our back, we'll scratch yours. That's the way the world works. That's exactly what happened. So the AMA, in their ignorance, said, fantastic, this will protect the rights of our members. We will have these freers, we'll be a CBO, everything will be fine. But what they forgot was that the FAA is not being honest about this whole thing. And remember, there was a whole lot of submissions to that original proposal for remote ID. And the FAA said, oh yes, we've listened and we've changed some things, some important things. And the AMA said, look, it works. We're working with the FAA. We've got this no network remote ID and we're going to have these freers and all this sort of stuff and so forth. But what they failed to read was the final rule that actually was then put into effect. The FAA said there will be no network remote ID at this time. At this time. 3 key words, at this time. Basically, they admitted that, yeah, we're not doing it right now, but it is our intention to do it. The only reason they're not doing the network remote ID with the ability to turn us off at any stage is because the technology isn't available. There's not enough coverage, not enough network coverage to support a network remote ID system as proposed in the regulation. As soon as that technology becomes available, you can bet your bottom dollar that suddenly broadcast remote ID will be a thing of the past and everyone will have to have network remote ID. And at that stage, you pay to fly if they let you. If they don't want models flying or drones flying in a particular area because it's going to be used by the occasional air taxi, autonomous air taxi and delivery drones, you will never get approval to arm and take off there. And remember, all the craft you buy will have to have built into them this override system that can't be tampered with. That means you cannot fly it unless you've got that approval via the network remote ID system. At that stage, the hobby's grounded, absolutely grounded. And what about all those freers? What about the things the AMA is so proud of? With CBO, we've got a freer. Well, forget it, it's a transient thing. The goal has been very clearly stated by the FAA. We want full control of your models and we want to create flying areas which we can get rid of over time. And that's exactly what they're going to do. They will bring back we're not going to have any more freers. But they took it out, they'll put it back in. I guarantee you anything you like, no more freers. From this point on, only existing freers will exist, and if land use changes, you can't get a new one. That's what's going to happen because all that airspace is too valuable to waste on hobbyists now. And that's the problem. It's the naivety of the groups that really think they're making a difference. Instead of standing strong, I mean, if I was in the AMA, I'd have stood strong. I would have stood strong. I would not have said, ooh, beads and blankets, ooh, special concessions for supporting a ridiculous restriction on one of the world's safest hobbies, which is what happened. Because if you look at it, we've been flying radio-controlled model aircraft, traditional aircraft, fixed-wing, home-built, scratch-built kits, all that sort of stuff. Been doing that for many, many decades. I personally have been doing it for over 60 years. I built my first model aircraft when I was about 7 or 8, and that's got to be like 63 years ago. And during that time, I've never injured anybody, never broken anyone else's property, never killed anybody. It's totally safe. And the number of deaths associated with the traditional hobby, you can probably count them on the fingers of one hand over decades and decades. Compare that to manned aviation. And you'll see that this hobby is the single safest branch of aviation that has ever existed. Yet we're now regulating it out of existence. It's not about safety. It's absolutely not about safety. And where I think the AMA should have drawn a line in the sand and said, right, this is not negotiable. They should have said to the FAA, hang on a moment. You've got a problem with drones. You've got a problem with people buying a Phantom from Best Buy and then going and making a nuisance of themselves at the local airport or dropping contraband into a prison. That's not our hobby. We don't do that. We fly model aircraft, right? We fly models of Spitfires and Mustangs and Piper Cubs. We haven't changed. We're still doing that. You can regulate the snot out of all these new camera drones and commercial drones, but leave us alone. We're not in there. You can't lump us in with the bad actors. We are not. We've proven over decades we're not bad actors. Yet the AMA chose not to do that. They deliberately chose not to draw a line in the sand and say, we're not negotiating on this. We demand that we are treated separately to the problem element, to the bad actors. They didn't do that because the FAA said, give you some beads and blankets, 30 pieces of silver if you fall into line with us. And naturally they said, yeah, fine, good, yeah, no. This P51 Mustang is just like a Phantom, absolutely the same as a Phantom. That's the problem that has got the hobby to where it is. So the AMA have thrown the hobby under a bus. They might think they're doing the right thing, and they might be all patting themselves on the back right now. We're a CBO, but 10 years time, I think we'll see that they actually continued. They took as much dirt out of the hole the hobby's been buried in as the FAA themselves by being complicit with an agenda that is open for everybody to see, except those who choose not to look at it, not to see it, which is crazy. Now, there are other advocacy groups out here too. We've got Flight Test. They're trying to get a CBO status. We've got the FPV Freedom Coalition. They're trying to get a CBO status. And I wish these organizations would just draw a line in the sand and say, no, we're not buying into your agenda to marginalize the hobby to oblivion, because that's what's happening, marginalizing it to oblivion. Even if these freers do not get abolished as such, anyone flying a model aircraft is going to have to do it in a little grassy field miles from anywhere at one of these freers. So we will not have our hobby in the eyes of the public anymore. People won't go down to the local park and see someone flying a little foamy anymore. No. They won't go to the schoolyard and see people flying foamies in the schoolyard. That's all going to be done in a grassy field tens of miles out of town. So the young people will not be exposed to this hobby in the way they have been in the past, and the hobby will grey out. It will grey out and disappear. The ironic thing is that the biggest losers in this massive push to destroy the hobby are the industries that are pushing, because it is from the hobby that those industries get their engineers, their designers, their pilots. There's not going to be young people coming into aviation through the normal route, which is through model aircraft anymore. They're not going to do it. They're going to do something else. They'll make computer games. So I expect that in 10 to 15 years' time, all these companies that are now pushing to get rid of the hobby will suddenly be clamoring, saying, we can't get new talent. No one's interested in becoming an aircraft designer or a pilot. Where are all the new people? Well, you killed them. You killed it by basically destroying the hobby. Now, this is just my opinion. Just my opinion. It's not a rant. It's bordering on a rant, isn't it? Boy, you should have seen that rant. That would have killed your toes. But it is sad. It is very, very sad that we've allowed a government department that is supposed to be working for the people to ride roughshod over the rights and freedoms of those people under direction of politicians who are being funded by huge corporations that want to get rid of us so they can make a fortune, or think they can make a fortune, out of this piece of airspace. The thing is, everybody is fooling themselves. We will not have skies filled with drones. The economics don't add up. We're not going to have people jumping on pilotless air taxis and zipping around the cities. Because if it's not safe for me to fly, or for you to fly, a drone like this on your own land without a remote ID device attached to it, how can it be safe to have 4, 5, 6 people hoisted into the air in a pilotless vehicle in an urban environment with no safety fallback system in the event of a total system failure? It's just not going to work. But as we've seen, it's not about safety. It's all about money. And you can't beat that. You just can't beat money. And I'm just so disappointed that the groups that are supposedly there to protect the hobby have sold out through ignorance, naivety, or maybe just greed. I don't know. You tell me down there. So where do we go in this hobby now? What do we do? In America, the writing is very much on the wall, very much on the wall. Hopefully other countries won't be quite so bad. Here in New Zealand, as I say, the Civil Aviation Authority admitted they don't make the rules. The politicians make the rules. And we know who influences the politicians. The people with the big wallets. But I'm going to be damn sure to be leading the fight against this. No way am I going to stand around and accept beads and blankets for the giving up all my freedoms and rights as a hobbyist. You tell me what you think. Rip me a new one if you don't agree. If you do agree, tell me why. Got any ideas as to how we can solve the situation? Please do so. I'm here to promote, protect, and support the hobby. That's what I want to do. I'm not making money out of this because that gives me so much freedom. I'm not being funded by politicians. I'm not being funded by Google or Amazon. I've got no one. The only people pay my bills are you guys out there through Patreon and through the YouTube watching my videos. So my only reason for doing this is pure to protect the hobby that's given me so much pleasure over so many decades. I hope it will give pleasure to even more people in the decades to come, but I really do fear for that. I do. Who would have thought when I was a 10-year-old flying models in the local schoolyard, who would have thought that just, what is it now, 60 years later, you'd have to have an exam, you'd have to be registered, you'd have to have a remote ID thing on your little model. Who would have thought that? Certainly I wouldn't have. I don't think anybody of the era would have thought that for one moment. That's what we've got. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye for now.
Overregulation is like a tumor. It's killing our hobby. It must be terminated. Now!